So Virtuous Lies and Black Despair, Julian Adorni, Jake Mackey. Teenage depression and suicide rates have been rising in the U.S. for years, but the rates among black teens are rising farther and faster than among those of other ethnicities. According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Youth Risk Behavior Survey from 2011 to 2021, the percentage of black teens who seriously considered suicide rose 69 percentage points from 13% in 2011 to a frightening 22% in 2021. The average increase among all ethnicities was 37.5 percentage points, just over half the rise documented in black teens. The same trend can be seen across multiple measures of mental health. In 2021, black teens were 63% more likely to have made a concrete suicide plan over the course of the past year than they were in 2011. Teens in general were only 38% more likely to have done so, and 75% more likely to have attempted suicide. The average increase among all teens was 25%. Complex social phenomena can rarely be attributed to a single cause. A range of factors, from increased social media use to less free play, may play a role in teen depression overall, and black teen depression in particular. But there is one possible explanation for these disturbing figures that is less often talked about: the virtuous lie that we tell about the prevalence of racism in the United States. It continues. A virtuous lie is a false or dubious claim that is asserted without qualification because it is thought to advance an ethical agenda. Interesting. Well-intentioned falsehoods like this exaggerate, indeed often catastrophize, the extent and scope of genuine problems in order to draw more attention to them in the hopes of resolving them. He goes on, we tell virtuous lies not only in order to change the world for the better, but in order to showcase our allegiance to the noble causes that they promote. So, in our hyperpolarized and censorious world, one way to protect ourselves from the accusation that we don't care about issue X is to speak in hyperbolic terms about the severity of issue X. The problem is that virtuous lies don't necessarily make the world a better place. In fact, they may end up harming the very people they are intended to help. He goes on. We can see this dynamic at work in one of the most prominent virtuous lies told in the modern U.S. The idea that almost everything about America is racist. The University of Washington's, quote, IT Inclusive Language Guide, end quote, for example, specifies that the reference to a, quote, brown bag lunch, end quote, is racially problematic. It goes on to say, the School of Social Work at the University of Southern California decided to stop using the word field, as in field work, because it is racist. In 2018, NPR informed its listeners... All right, let's go on. So, in 2018, NPR informed its listeners that, quote, white tears are racist, while the New York Times berated real estate agents for using the term master bedroom. Ibram X. Kendi, popularizer of the term anti-racism, has argued that standardized tests are, quote, the most effective racist weapon ever devised to objectively degrade black and brown minds and legally exclude their bodies from prestigious schools, end quote. Even if a black student somehow succeeds, despite Kendi's concerns, in joining a STEM department, it matters little. Because according to an article in the peer-reviewed biology journal Cell, today, black scientists continue to suffer institutional slavery. And it's not just black scientists. According to a group of activists dubbed, quote, 13ers, by historian Daryl Michael Scott, slavery was never abolished, but lives on through the 13th Amendment. So, as if modern slavery were not enough, black Americans today also face a kind of genocide, according to law professor Kimberly Crenshaw. And then, in 2020, she wrote that black people are subjected to, quote, racial terror, similar to that of the slavery and Jim Crow eras at the hands of police and vigilantes. All right, let's get there. So he goes, virtuous lies like these spread, echoed by sympathetic outlets and voices, until the underlying ideas have penetrated deep into the mainstream. For example, I don't know what the mainstream is in this context, but for example, in a recent survey, 54% of very liberal respondents believed that between 1,000 and 10,000 unarmed black Americans are killed by police every year. In another major survey, 80% of African American respondents thought that a young black man was more likely to be shot and killed by police than to die in a traffic accident. These beliefs, thankfully, bear no resemblance to reality. In 2020, 7,494 African Americans were killed in traffic accidents. That same year, 242 African Americans were killed by police, only 18 of them unarmed. All three of these numbers are too high, but the number of traffic deaths is orders of magnitude higher than the other two. Black people should be far more concerned about automobile safety than about fatal unarmed encounters with cops. The virtuous lie that racism is ubiquitous also manifests in fatalistic statements about how hard it is for Black Americans to succeed. In their book, Is Everyone Really Equal?, Oslim Sinsoy and Robin DiAngelo, of white fragility fame, argue that members of racial minorities, quote, do not hold political, economic, and institutional power, end quote, in the United States. This conveniently ignores the countless Black men and women who have risen to positions of power in government, business, academia, and other sectors. Pretty sure we can count them pretty easily, actually. But worse, it sends a message of disempowerment to young Black people. If one benefit of affirmative action is that it helps young Black Americans to see people like themselves in positions of power, then the message of DiAngelo and Sinsoy is disaffirmative action. No one who looks like you has achieved anything in this country. So it goes on here. For some on the farther reaches of the progressive left, I hate left and right, and I hate the way that started, but we're going to continue. It's considered acceptable to claim that minorities lack any agency at all. Where is that considered acceptable? I don't know. They are crushed beneath a vast racist machinery that they cannot hope to escape. How can you escape racist machinery in a society based on racism? But according to DiAngelo and Sinsoy, quote, the logic of individual autonomy that underlies liberal humanism, the idea that people are free to make independent, rational decisions that determine their own fate, is a mechanism for keeping the marginalized in their place by obscuring larger structural systems of inequality, end quote. That is, if you're a Black American and you think you can get ahead through your own efforts, you're deluded. You've fallen for the propaganda American society spouts to hide its racism.
I'm sorry, can you reread that last part? Because
yeah,
that did not make it. It sounded to me like he was saying that the liberals are trying to obscure the racism.
No, he's saying that DiAngelo and Sinsoy make this claim, and the claim is that the logic of individual autonomy that underlies liberal humanism, right? So this whole liberal humanism movement, which is the idea that people are free to make independent, rational decisions that determine their own fate, which is just like a fact of our existence as human beings. But like, he's saying that they're saying that it's a mechanism for keeping the marginalized in their place by obscuring larger systems.
That, or is he saying they're saying that?
He's saying that they're saying that. Yeah. He's saying that they're saying that. And he says, that is, if you're a Black American and think you can get ahead through your own efforts, you're deluded. You've fallen for the propaganda American society spouts to hide its racism. All right, so let's continue on here with the article. For many on the left, here we go again. It's become an article of faith that nothing ever gets better, which means that race relations are still stuck in the antebellum period. Again, no one is thinking that. Right. For example, as Frank Wilderson III, a founding figure of Afro-pessimism, has it, nothing ever changes, and even today, Blackness is coterminous with slaveness. George Packer has called this, quote, historical fatalism. As he puts it in The Atlantic, historical fatalism believes that nothing ever really changes. Mass incarceration is the new Jim Crow. Modern police departments are the heirs of slave patrols. Historical fatalism combines inevitability and essentialism. The present is forever trapped in the past and defined by the worst of it. All right, here we go. He also then quotes sociologist Musa al-Garbi, sums up this catastrophizing strain of thought. For people of color, getting educated in America is to be cudgeled relentlessly with messages about how oppressed, exploited, and powerless we are, and how white people need to get it together to change this, but probably never will. It is hard to imagine a more demoralizing message. All right, let's keep going. So it says, even at the top of society, life is almost unbearably bad for Black Americans, some prominent progressives claim. Writing in the New York Times. I love, by the way, that he talked all about hyperbole in the beginning, and then it's all this language that's like catastrophizing and hyperbole, and that's all that's in this. Even at the top of society, life is almost unbearably bad for Black Americans, some prominent progressives claim. Writing in the New York Times, Chris LeBron, associate professor of philosophy at Johns Hopkins, describes being Black in America like this. Every day you feel like you're living with a knee on your neck. If even a professor at one of America's most prestigious universities believes that merely existing while Black is a life and death struggle, then the message to many young African Americans is clear. No matter how high you climb, every facet of your life will always be defined by racism. And it goes on. Obviously, racism does exist in the United States. See, you have to say that. And this is whenever that is said, I always look to see whether there's like a but that comes after it. So let's see if we see the but.
The law of everything before the but is bullshit. Like
exactly. Let's see. So obviously, racism does exist in the United States at both personal and institutional levels. Isn't that the opposite of what he was just saying the whole time? Commentator David French notes that his Black daughter is the target of harassment and of assumptions that she doesn't belong far more than his white children are. Let's go on. Criminologist Radley Balco has presented a persuasive, exhaustively researched case that there is a racist element to the U.S. criminal justice system. So have many other people. There's so much evidence and data. All Americans, whatever their skin color, should be committed to stamping out prejudice and institutionalized double standards like these whenever they encounter them. But telling virtuous lies about the scope
and... here we are. There's the but.
We're back. It's a lie.
Waiting for it.
It was true. Now we're back to it being a lie. So, but telling virtuous lies about the scope and impact of the racism that currently exists, which I don't know how he feels comfortable, evaluating that, in the United States will not help us do that. Instead, it is likely to simply increase depression and anxiety among Black people by encouraging a distorted, overly negative picture of the world. Gallup notes that in 2011, 65% of African Americans thought that relations between white and Black people were, quote, very good or, quote, somewhat good. By 2021, that number had fallen to 33%. But this decline in perceived racial harmony does not reflect reality. In 2006, 52.7% of Black Americans reported that they knew someone whom they considered racist. By 2015, this figure had fallen to 47.2%. And he goes on. Gallup notes that 94% of Americans, including 93% of white Americans, now support interracial marriage. Oh, well, that must mean racism is over. Respective increases of almost 45% and 55% from 20 years ago. When it comes to race relations, the progressive left is selling non-white Americans a doom and gloom message that is thankfully out of touch with reality. The virtuous lie about racism also promotes learned helplessness among Black people by suggesting that every element of society is rigged to keep them oppressed and there's nothing they can do to change that. A study published by the Manhattan Institute asked Black students to first read 2 passages and then to agree or disagree with a variety of statements designed to measure the degree to which they felt in control of their own lives. For example, when I make plans, I am almost certain that I can make them work. The first passage was from Ta-Nehisi Coates' 2015 essay, Letter to My Son. In it, Coates claims that, quote, in America, it is traditional to destroy the Black body. It is heritage. And that, quote, your body can be destroyed if you sell cigarettes without the proper authority or even turn into a dark stairwell. The second passage was from Eric Kaufman, who authored the study. It argued that African Americans are the descendants of conquerors and that they lived in sophisticated city-states and kingdoms like the Ashanti Empire. The study found that black teens who read the passage from Coates were 7 to 15% more likely to agree with statements indicating helplessness and disempowerment. The virtuous lie that racism is endemic and prevents, he loves saying virtuous lie. The virtuous lie that racism is endemic and prevents black people from ever getting ahead is unlikely to entirely explain the spike in suicidality among black teens. But the idea that catastrophizing about racism hurts the mental health of black teens makes sense. Okay, help me make sense of it. He says, as Al Garvey notes, the internalization of these messages may contribute to the observed ideological gaps and psychic distress among women and people of color. In many left circles, great efforts are made to sensitize everyone to historical and ongoing bias and discrimination. Ooh. Women and minorities are told to attribute negative outcomes in their lives to racism or sexism. It's so wild. I'll get back to it in a second, but let me read the rest of this quote. They are encouraged to interpret ambiguous encounters, or situations uncharitably, i.e., as manifestations of racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. These tendencies likely undermine the well-being of the populations they are supposed to help. Here we go. Heightened perceptions of bias and discrimination are robustly associated with mental anguish. Robustly associated. Interesting. Social strain, and adverse physical outcomes. The more people perceive themselves to be surrounded by others who harbor bias or hostility against them, and the more they view their life prospects as hostage to a system that is fundamentally rigged against them, the more likely they become to experience anxiety, depression, psychogenic, and psychosomatic health problems, or to behave in antisocial ways. When we tell black children and teens that the system is rigged against them, that police have declared open season on them, and that they cannot succeed in life, we should not be surprised when some of them become depressed or even express a desire to end their lives. We should, however, be careful not to understate the effects of racism. Well, too late for that. A Pollyanna-ish attitude can produce its own problems. If we refuse to listen to black teens when they tell us that they have encountered racism, we may leave them feeling unsupported, ignored, and alienated. They need to be supported appropriately, and they need adults to help them put their encounters with racism into appropriate and non-catastrophizing perspective. We also need to be precise. Sound solutions to pressing societal problems must be based on accurate data and responsible claims. How ironic. Virtuous lies can inhibit our ability to solve those problems. If we want to have a chance of truly improving society, and it can certainly stand to be improved, then we must begin by telling the truth about the current state of things as best we can. The end.